What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Avarice Podcast. And girls. I don't mean to imply that only guys listen to me, even though I know it's probably the truth. How you guys doing today? So, we're not going to do a movie commentary today. As you may or may not know, if you've been listening, I'm kind of trying to branch out and do more things. I'm still going to do the movie commentaries. It's a staple. It gives me content reliably, and I enjoy doing them. But I also want to work in some other stuff. I don't want to be confined to the movie realm so much. Although this is a TV show, I'm going to be talking about Game of Thrones. I already did a podcast about this. I apologize if you hear that noise in the background. That's my dog eating. There's not much I can do. Charge it to the game. Anyway, I did a podcast a couple of days after the finale aired, and I kind of got my bitch on. I was in my feelings. I was a little bit harsh. I didn't have my arms quite wrapped around it. I wasn't sure how I felt or why I felt that way or exactly what happened. I was just very disappointed, and I don't want to pin that on any specific person. I should inform you guys that I'm probably to be considered a normie. I didn't find out about Game of Thrones till the second season, so I watched the first and second season all in a row. Then, of course, there was the huge gap. I watched the third season. Then, having a kid and married life, being a parent, all that shit, jobs, got in the way, and I didn't have the time to dedicate to really pay attention to it, because it's not a show you can half-ass watch, or you're going to have no idea what's going on. So, I put it off for several years and didn't catch up until season 7 was already over. So, basically what we did was we started at the beginning and we ran all the way from season 1 through season 7 so we would be caught up when season 8 came out. We probably did it too quickly now that I'm looking back on it, because we didn't give ourselves a chance to really absorb the content of each individual episode and kind of let that resonate and let the dots connect and kind of let ourselves recover from anything that may or may not happen. We didn't really have a chance to build up any expectations because we didn't get a lot of extra time to think about what might happen. So later down the line, when season 8 comes out, I really was kind of a blank canvas. I didn't know what to expect. I had kind of forgotten everything that happened because it was like a cram session for a college test. I crammed the first 7 seasons, and so it's a blur, and a lot of the minutia and kind of the ancillary details, those get lost in the mix. Like, Jon being a Targaryen caught me by surprise. I didn't see the clues along the way that I probably should have seen. I actually thought that he was going to be one of Robert's bastards. I don't know why I thought that, but I thought that. That was probably a dumb thing to think. I know there was all kinds of weird theories going around that Tyrion may be a Targaryen, all kinds of shit. So I did want to preface this by saying I'm not claiming to be the end-all be-all or to know everything. I haven't read the books. I'm just sharing my thoughts. I'm actually interested to know if people would be interested. I'm thinking about going back to the beginning, starting with season 1, episode 1, and doing commentary tracks for the whole thing and analyzing it along the way, kind of sharing my experience of picking up on details I may have missed, connecting dots now that we know how everything ends up. Because the first few seasons are so good, right? And there's so much potential there, and you really want to see how everything turns out. And then what we got with the last couple seasons didn't live up to our expectations at all. And it's not just like fan favorites and you wanting each character to work out the way it's the way it was executed didn't feel authentic to the Game of Thrones series previously. It didn't feel authentic to the work of George R.R. Martin, and it wasn't driven so much by the dialogue of the characters as it was by these big over-the-top action scenes. Shit, I forgot how I got onto that tangent. Motherfucker. Anyway, so I will jump in. I've got a few. I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. It's a weird to try to wrap your arms around the entirety of the series. Oh, I was talking about connecting the dots. That's just it. Okay. So we get that ending, and we know that a lot of that is probably not what George laid out. Because if he had the whole story laid out, he would probably have the book done. So I don't know exactly which parts he gave to D&D, what plot points they had to hit. Everybody seems to agree that right around the Hodor revelation is when they ran out of George R.R. Martin material and started kind of flying by the seat of their pants. And we don't know what kind of beats he was given towards the end, or he was giving them, I should say, towards the end. You know that, well, we found out that he did tell them that Bran ends up being king, so we know that that's how he wants to end the story. I'm going to say that he probably told them that Arya kills the Night King. I am undecided on if he told them that Jon kills Daenerys or not. I think that whole thing might have been their decision on how to get her out of the picture in order for Bran to be king, because they may not have really understood how to make that happen. When you look at Bran and what he's capable of and his kind of vibe he puts off, he's kind of out of it. He never seems like he's really present or lucid. So you picture him somehow gaining the throne once Daenerys wins it. She seems like she's on a beeline for it. So anyway, I know that there's a lot of shit that got thrown out the window when they made their way to the end, but I'm still, the inquisitive part of my nature, it still wants to try to connect the dots the best I can and figure out how these pieces fit together. Pick up the pieces, see how they fit. Now that we supposedly have all the pieces, which we really don't, because we don't have George R.R. Martin's completed work. We don't know how he would have gotten to these certain points in the story. And that actually inspired me to read the books. It might be a fool's pursuit at this point, because a lot of people think that he's never going to finish the series. So I might be setting off on this journey just to reach a dead end. But nonetheless, I ordered the series. I even ordered 2 copies of the first book so that my wife and I can start it simultaneously. She reads more often than I do, and she's more used to reading than I don't ever read. So I figure she's going to get through the first book a lot faster than me, and then she can move on to the rest. And then by the time I get to the second book, she'll probably be on the third, fourth, or if not done. It's not that I can't read. It's not in my routine to set a time aside to read. Did I say set a time aside? Set aside time to read. Whereas she is in the habit of reading several times throughout the day, basically every day. So she's going to eclipse me in volume rapidly. Actually, I'll never have the lead. She's just going to outpace me the entire time. And she would lap me if she felt like reading them again. But the story is so good. And the TV show, at least for the first 5-6 seasons, is so good. I really want to know what's in the books now. I want to know, because you have people who are fans of the books and not the show, vice versa. But you hear people who've read the book say that there was a lot left out in the TV show, which you kind of have to do. And it's also, the books are done in phases where you're from one character's point of view for an entire chapter, and then you go to another character's point of view. And you don't catch up with certain characters for long periods of time. Whereas the TV show kind of has them all jammed in the entire time, and they all stay there the entire time, even if they don't really belong. At least that's what I've gathered just based off videos I've watched and stuff I've read. So I would like to know if anybody's interested in listening to that. If I were to go back and start from the beginning and record commentaries episode by episode and try to piece together shit and figure out exactly what they never explained and see if maybe I could guess where it's going. I'm interested in that, but it's so fresh in people's mind. I don't know if they would really want to go over it again and re-experience opening that wound so quickly. Anyway, comment, let me know. Maybe I'll try doing it anyway. Maybe I'll do a test episode on the pilot and see how it's received. So now let's go ahead and move into it. I'm going to start with the Night King. So, in a lot of people's minds, I think the Night King was built up to be kind of the uber boss, the penultimate war, the final chapter, the whatever you want to call it. He is the final mission for the humans in the realm in the series. That seems to be kind of what they're building it up to. But if you really look at it, the White Walkers and the Night King make up a very small portion of the show itself. There's a lot of talk of the legend of them. They do some badass shit. They seem imposing and scary when they're on screen. But the people-to-people interactions are a lot more prominent, way more prominent screen time-wise than the Night Walker or the White Walkers and the Night King are. Now, I haven't read the book, so I'm not sure how prominent of figures they are in the books either. I'm just going off the show. But they kind of keep them in the background basically the entire time. They have episodes where they play a major part, but basically they're in the background the entire time. So when they finally come up and have their big, hurrah, it's almost a little bit fitting that it was just kind of a side note and an afterthought, and we were just done with it as soon as it started. But at the same time, I was very disappointed by how the Night King turned out. So the Night King was created by the Children of the Forest like 8,000 years prior to A Game of Thrones. And the purpose was to eliminate humans as a threat because the humans were displacing the Children of the Forest, I guess. So humans were the threat. And they used a human and dragon glass to create the Night King. And then there's White Walkers. But somehow something went wrong, like there was a glitch in the wiring. Their spell, they said one or two words backwards. I don't know what happened. But they ended up killing everything. So then you have, it's said that Brandon Stark from thousands of years ago, a different Brandon Stark, probably 3,000 years ago, I think it's supposed to be, with the assistance of the Children of the Forest, their magic, and giants, built the wall where Castle Black is, the wall between the north and the south-north. So you have the Children of the Forest go from creating the Night King and essentially creating the White Walkers to assisting the Starks in building the wall that keeps the Night King and the White Walkers out. So there's whatever they were created for, it doesn't really seem to have a correlation to what they're going to end up as, because their creator helped build the wall to keep them on the other side. He has this connection to Bran that never gets fully explored. Why is he so honed in on Bran? What is the attraction there? Because the glitch with the Children of the Forest seems to be that the White Walkers kill every living thing. But they created them to kill humans. So for some reason, the Night King sees Bran as like the ultimate goal for taking out the humans. Is that the implication? I'll explore that more when I talk about Bran. But the way the Night King was kind of built up and promoted, the hype around the Night King, to not see him do much of anything in the final season was kind of bullshit. Like really bullshit. if I'm being honest. I'm okay with Arya killing him. That's fine if that's going to be the way it plays out. Maybe do it in a little bit better way. But it just seemed like a big build-up for nothing. For one, that entire episode was so dark. You couldn't tell. They were like playing camera tricks on you, trying to make you think maybe something important might be happening, but you couldn't tell. And when they're doing that, you basically know nothing important's happening, or they would focus on it and hang on it. Nobody important died. It's just a lot of filler. This whole season, basically since they ran out of source material, has been a lot of filler. I don't know exactly whose responsibility or who to blame, like I said before, but that's been the case nonetheless. So that's the kind of my thoughts on the Night King's story arc. I feel like there was way more information that we needed to be given along the way prior to his end that would help us make some sense of that. But I don't know if they didn't get that info from Martin, and I don't think they either didn't have the gumption to take it in their own direction, or they weren't creative enough. I'm not trying to insult them. I'm just trying to make sense of it. So you move on to Arya's story arc. So Arya is kind of the most Stark of the Starks, if you look at it. She's the tomboy. She's a badass. She believes in justice. She has a calm, stoic demeanor, but she takes care of business. And she has a lot of trouble giving up her identity as Arya Stark when she's doing her faceless training. She keeps Needle. And she just seems to not be able to leave, or she's drawn back, I should say, to home. She's drawn back to being a Stark. I know that she didn't earn the royal pedigree that Sansa did. She doesn't have the respect of the community the way Jon does. She doesn't have dragons the way Daenerys does. But she almost seems like she would have been the most fitting leader of the North. Like, take no shit, handle your business, not about small talk. It's cold up here. We ain't got time to waste. Like, maybe I'm off base on that, but I feel like the end of Arya's timeline wasn't going out to be an explorer and sailing west of Westeros. For one, the claim is that nobody knows what's west of Westeros. How the fuck is that even possible? You have the Iron Fleet and everybody out there sailing around, and nobody's ever tried to go west of Westeros. You've had dragons way back when, hundreds of years ago. Aegon Targaryen had dragons, and nobody's ever gone west. Bran can warg into different creatures. He's never tried to see what's west. He's never looked in the past and gone west. Like, the idea that nobody knows what is west is absurd to me. But I guess you could run with it because after all, I live in the United States, and there was civilization over in Europe and Asia and everywhere else for a long time before they ever realized that if they just went west, there was land that way too. Like, if you really think about it, it's almost absurd that it took so long for the Spanish to stumble, or the Italians to stumble onto North America. That's kind of funny. Arya's kind of, she seemed like she was building off to have like a major impact at the end here, and I know she gets to kill the Night King. That kind of probably should have been her swan song. She overstayed her welcome towards the end of it, I think, and it just seemed like, think back to when they beheaded her father and how shocked we were. We didn't have any moments like that in this season at all. We knew that Jon and Arya and Sansa were going to survive. At the beginning of the season, I would have told you I knew that Daenerys was going to survive. But after they did her dirty in episode 5, I assumed she was probably going to be killed in episode 6, just because it seemed like the only way to clean it up and kind of tie it all up into a bow. But I think that's an... Arya and her... Okay, the faceless training. What the fuck was the point of the faceless training? Like, even if you didn't create those characters and you don't have the knowledge bank to draw upon, take a big-ass poster board or a whiteboard or a chalkboard and break it up into columns with character names and write their traits down or stuff they've done and make sure that it all correlates, that it all goes into certain, like, we need ideas for what to do with Arya. Okay, well, let's look at the Arya column. She's done this, she's done that. Oh, faceless training. We have to make that lead somewhere. They didn't have any clue. We move on to Sansa. Sansa's arc is basically that she starts off kind of naive and she just wants the illusion of being queen. She thinks she wants to be queen just based off what she sees and the glamour aspects of it. And she goes through a significant amount of trauma throughout the course of the series. And I suppose that's supposed to be like her trial by fire or her rite of passage. She's now gained the experience and the knowledge to be a true leader rather than somebody who just wants to wear a crown because they think it makes them look cool or is going to get them a certain amount of esteem. The first couple seasons, her character really bothered the shit out of me. It might all go back to the scene with the wolf. When Arya is having the sword fight or sparring with the butcher's boy, and Joffrey and Sansa come up, and there's the whole interaction, and the wolf ends up biting Joffrey, and Arya throws his sword in the water. When she gets called upon, and she doesn't even pick a side. Not only does she lie, but she doesn't even pick, and she's, I don't know, I can't remember, I don't know, and then she ends up her dog ends up being killed because they can't find Arya's dog. That I don't know, I can't. The first season for me just made me strongly dislike the Sansa character. And it didn't seem that I was supposed to. It's just kind of the way it turned out. I don't know what it is. Some people just rub you the wrong way. I asked my wife the same thing. Like, I wanted to know if I was weird. I was like, her character bothers you, right? And she's like, oh, yeah, I can't stand her. I was like, okay, so it's not just me. I don't know. But she seemed to gain some favor with my wife over the course of time. Whereas I don't know, I guess I had written her... I was never particularly thrilled with scenes that had Sansa in them. I don't know. I don't really know. So she ends up becoming Queen of the North and requesting their independence, which was kind of a weird move. I'll get to it a little bit later on when we get to Bran in the final meeting, but it seems like there's other candidates for being the leader of the North, and she just kind of stole it. She's kind of wanted it more than they did, which I guess has been her MO kind of the entire time. She's wanted to be queen. She's wanted to go after it, and so she's pursued it in different ways. She got stuck with some horrible dudes. She was with Joffrey, and then she was with Ramsay. Like, she's had a tough go of it, and she's definitely calloused and hardened, but she just wasn't. I didn't think she was the most compelling choice for the Queen of the North, especially now that they're independent. But that's just kind of my opinion. There's not an inherent flaw in that choice. So, I didn't talk about the Starks are kind of the thing of a legend. If you go back to when I was talking about the old Brandon Stark from thousands of years ago that helped construct the wall, helped with the Long Night, and up until Aegon had never surrendered or bent the knee or anything. There's this lore about the Starks, like they're a different thing. And the Children of the Forest seem to be okay with the Starks in a different way, because all the conflict and shit that happens in the show, the Starks never start any of it, really. There's Robb, who goes back on his word a couple of times, and then he ends up paying for that. But these all-out wars and drama, the Starks never really start it. They kind of keep to themselves, unless there's an injustice. Then they might stick their nose into it. And I think that might have something to do with why the cards all seem to fall in their favor at the end. They don't all make it out unscathed or with their primary choice of life, but, well, for the most part, they really do. I don't know if that was D&D patronizing the audience or pandering to what they would want, because the Starks became kind of the main characters of the show, even though they're not really in the books, so I'm told. But other than the ones that got taken out at the beginning when we're still in George's work, Arya, never really in jeopardy, gets to kill the Night King and then sails off to become Christina Columbus and figure out what's on the other side of the Grand Ocean. Sansa never really seemed in jeopardy in this season at all, and just kind of declares that she's the queen, and then declares that the North is independent, and it gets given to her, even though it doesn't really make sense because her brother is the king. We haven't addressed that yet. Jon, we'll talk about Jon and Bran, I suppose, when I get to their point. Next, I have Jaime. So Jaime starts off. The first episode is kind of jam-packed if you go back and watch it. I know people bitched about the time shifting and the rapid jumps, or the big jumps in the timeline in the most recent season. If you go back and watch that first episode, just based off how quickly the dogs grow, you can see that we're advancing through time very rapidly. And a raven comes that says that the king is riding from King's Landing, which takes a month. And then a few seconds later, there he is at Winterfell. And they ride back to King's Landing within the same episode. Like, we're skipping significant chunks of time, and there's a lot of information packed in there. So Jaime starts out as the Kingslayer, and that happens actually off screen in the past before anything we're introduced to, but we get told about it very quickly and reminded about it often. And it's this label, almost like this scarlet letter he wears, of the cardinal sin he committed, but he came out of it unscathed because his twin sister is married to the king who won the rebellion. And people look down on him for it. And he seems to use that as a defense mechanism. Like, he seems to puff out his chest even more. Later on through the series, we find out that he has more humanity to him, and that he had probably pretty justifiable reasons for doing what he did in killing the Mad King. From his point of view, he was keeping people safe, he thought. It wasn't the betrayal and the, quote, stabbing in the back that everyone makes it out to be. That's just the story that's been told. He actually thought he was defending the innocent in that moment. But our first intro to Jaime, he's an arrogant prick. He's a total asshole. He's the Kingslayer. He talks shit to Jon about how he's never swung a sword at a real person. He talks shit to Ned, challenges him to a duel or to a tournament. He's just got this real arrogant thing about him. Then you see that he's fucking his twin sister, and he shoves Bran out the window, and you're like, my God, this guy's deplorable. He's like working his way towards being the ultimate bad guy. And then from there, we really walk it back. On the surface, in the first episode, he appears to be what it turns out that Cersei is, and he ends up actually being much kinder than the surface level image that you're first presented with. He is actually the only one who's nice to Tyrion. If you go back and start, and I did watch like the first couple episodes of the first season just because I wanted to see if it was really as good as I remembered and pick up a couple. So if you go back from the very beginning, they're looking for Tyrion when they get to Winterfell. And he's in the whorehouse, and as Jaime's walking up, he's got a huge smile on his face. He goes in, they have their banter, and he sends 4 more whores in so that Tyrion can get to the feast in time. He comes to breakfast in the morning, and he's making wisecracks, and Jaime's sitting there laughing along with him. You can see that Jaime actually is the only one who is kind to Tyrion from the jump. And from there, he walks it back. He starts having more redeeming scenes. He starts to get some good qualities under his belt. And he's working his way into one of the best turns from heel to face. One of the best hero turns we've ever seen on a TV show, maybe. He's just almost there. He's really working his way from worst villain to biggest hero, or maybe not biggest hero, but so then to have him hit it and quit it with Brienne just to run back to Cersei and then authentically try to help her escape. Like they wiped all those previous seasons off the board, and he went back to being almost the exact same guy he was at the very beginning of the first season. That's one of the things that I can't believe. Okay, you can make that make sense, but it's going to take a bunch of seasons for him to get back there, I feel like. But I just don't think that's one of the George R.R. Martin points that he would have given them. Jaime goes back to Cersei and they die as the castle collapses under or above them. So that brings us to Cersei. Cersei is an odd one because she's a great character. She invokes that kind of visceral hatred. She's very good at being a bitch. She's sharp. She's strategic. But she also goes through some trials and tribulations. You see the walk where she's naked, losing her children. She's been through some shit. It's a very well developed and strong character. So in this last season, she basically just stares out a window and drinks out of a cup and fucks Euron. And then her death was one of the least satisfying things you could have ever had for a character of her magnitude. It almost felt like a fuck you to us. Like, I was pissed off that they were trying to make me feel bad for her in that moment. At least that's what it felt like they were trying to pull out of me. It felt like they wanted me to sympathize with her as she's standing there pregnant, feeling helpless, no way to escape, and literally the walls are all crumbling down around her. And I don't appreciate that because she's been built up to be this super villain bitch. And now that the Night King's gone, she is the final boss. She is the boss battle for Daenerys. And we get this kind of Romeo and Juliet-esque ending where she dies in Jaime's arms and one layer of bricks collapses on him. That's the other bullshit thing. They made it look like that entire fucking basement collapsed. Like it was nothing. Flat like a pancake. 9/11. Whoosh, everything's gone. And then later Tyrion goes down there and finds them, and they're covered in one little layer of bricks in the center of the room, and no other part of the room did the ceiling collapse. Hey, come on, bro. You gotta seal it up a little tighter than that. And the fucking cheesiness of Tyrion coming up and seeing that gold hand sticking out of the rocks. Like, did they do that just so that we would believe she was dead? Because you don't really need to do that. Every scene that takes place thereafter kind of indicates to us that she's gone, and the series is ending, so if she's alive or not, the point's kind of moot. She's out of the picture. She's not the queen anymore. So Tyrion's character arc. Tyrion is one of the, if not the best character through the first 4 or 5 seasons. His wit and the strategy and the way he gets himself out of all the situations. He's almost entirely responsible for the comic relief. And then he turns into kind of a dumbass by this season and does stuff that puts his neck on the line in a way that he wouldn't before. At the beginning seasons, the show seemed more based around the ripple effect, the ramifications of what you do. How is this going to be received by people, and what is going to be their response to you? And making the society function as a whole, and your place in society, and what your role is, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. In the later seasons, it becomes about like the personal psychology of these individuals and what they believe, and them being self-righteous and them trying to be martyrs, or lack thereof, them not doing shit, if you're talking about Jon. It really took a twist, because a lot of the things that you see, like Varys do in this season, or Tyrion do, they're things that someone who was worried about the implications societally wouldn't do. Someone who was worried about their safety and their spot in the community. But they seem to just go about everything all haphazardly. I guess it's fitting in a way that he ends up Hand of the King. It kind of feels hollow. I think that's because of the degradation of the writing around his character towards the end. I think if you had George writing for Tyrion, it comes off much more believable that he is best suited to be Hand of the King because of his wit and his knowledge. He's always reading. He's cunning. He has a knowledge of history. He's been in the Battle of the Blackwater. He's a good advisor. At least he was before they kind of stopped figuring out how to write for him, and they made him hand for Khaleesi, and he started fucking up all the time. They really started to make him look stupid when he was very cunning earlier in the series. Jon. Okay, so Jon's identity, like the identity that he strives for, is almost to disappear from the very beginning, if you really look at it. It ends up being revealed that he is actually a Targaryen, half Stark. He's Rhaegar's son. But he wasn't raised with that identity. I think that's the contrast we get towards the end of the series between him and Dany, is that Dany, maybe she has this kind of belief that it's owed to her. And that She probably wasn't fed that when she was younger, but she heard her brother constantly saying it about himself. And in the first season, she comes to believe that she is superior to her brother. So then she kind of takes on all of his claims as the rightful heir. Whereas Jon was always a bastard. He never thought he was getting anything. He never thought anybody was going to care about him. He never thought he got to be shit. So then when the opportunity comes, he never really wants it. That's not what he was expecting out of life. It's very stark contrast to Daenerys, who has been expecting that for quite some time now. And even before she was expecting it for herself, her brother was telling her that that's what he was going to achieve. So, in the opening season, Jon's the bastard. He's not even welcome at dinner when the king and queen come to visit. He's outside training, and he's going to go join the Night's Watch. He seems to be fairly close with his siblings, probably Arya the most, and his mother hates him. So there's certain things that the other kids are allowed to do, ways that they're addressed, the respect they're given, privileges they have, that he isn't afforded, even though he is smack dab in the middle of them in age and growing up shoulder to shoulder with them. It would be a very weird feeling, I think, and he believes that Ned Stark is his dad. So he's led to believe he's a second-class citizen because of something that is no fault of his own. Just the story that he's Ned Stark's bastard. He gets addressed as bastard. You know, oh, you're Ned Stark's bastard. Like, he doesn't have an identity. That is his, just something that's out of his control is who he is. He's Ned Stark's bastard. And you can see that he just doesn't feel like that's his place, so he wants to cut out and go join the Night's Watch, take the black. And he kind of has delusions of grandeur about what that entails. He believes that it's a much more prestigious and disciplined organization than it actually is. And those beliefs may not be unfounded entirely, but I think he's expecting a more polished recruit and a more reputable type of person to be joining. And when he gets there, he finds out that it's a lot of rapists and thieves and people that were given the choice of dismemberment or service, and they chose service. And it kind of seems to be leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. Like, despite the fact that he is a bastard and he came from a place where he really didn't have an identity other than that, he was still raised in a castle. He still has gotten to train with excellent weapons. His father was still an honorable man and a great soldier. He still has this kind of foundation for life that these other guys don't necessarily have. And he is looking down on them for that. And I think it's Tyrion who points out to him that, not overtly, but that he's kind of doing the same thing to these guys that his siblings were doing to him and that everybody was doing to him back in Winterfell. Slapping this label on him and thinking that he's less than when he's not afforded the same privileges that they are through no fault of his own. So he takes the black and he slowly starts to gain great leadership qualities. It starts in the first season where he is helping the new recruits train. He's giving them pointers. He's teaching them. And he's kind of building a camaraderie with them, a respect. And because he's like the master in their eyes, it's natural for him to be the leader. Especially in an environment like that, where you live and die by the sword. He who's best with the sword is most likely going to be the leader. That's how shit gets done in this realm, is conquering. And throughout the course of his arc, he struggles to maintain his integrity. He wants to be honorable and do the right thing at all costs. and it even gets him killed. And then he gets brought back from the dead by the Red Woman. And at that point, he has the highest level of respect from the rest of his troops that you could get. He died for what he believed in, and then he was resurrected. He's on some zombie shit, like some Jesus shit, and they're like, okay, they fall in line right away. That never really gets addressed again, the fact that he came back from the dead. And if I'm not mistaken, he is currently dead in the books. And it's unknown if George R.R. Martin is actually going to bring him back to life in the next book or not. I could be speaking out of school there, but I think that's what I heard. Jon makes his way clear to being the king of the North, right? And not... Again, he's reluctant the entire time. He doesn't want this power. They're just kind of shoving it on him. And he's accepting it because that's his character. That's part of his integrity and his honor. It would be more of a slight against his name to not accept it and allow it to be fumble-fucked around and to be done poorly than to just shoulder the burden willingly or begrudgingly and pursue forward and do the best job. Do your duty. And then comes the revelation that he is actually not a bastard. He's a Targaryen. And he's actually the rightful heir. So even though Dany's older than him, his dad was the rightful heir, and he was born, obviously, before his dad died, making him the next in line. So she kind of gets skipped, I think, because she wasn't... Like, it's weird how the lineage moves. It never moves side to side. It only goes down. So if the king gets killed and has a sibling that's almost the same age, it still goes down to the son. Anywho, and it felt like that was going to be another major part of the story. So you've got two things with Jon that never really get flushed out as well as they could have. The fact that he is resurrected and the fact that he's half Targaryen. It would have been cool to find out if he could survive fire or not. They never even really play with that idea at all. The dragon doesn't fuck with him. The dragon lets him ride it. So he's definitely got some of the characteristics that Khaleesi has. But her brother thought he was a dragon and wasn't. Right? He got killed by dumping the molten metal on his head. So Jon, while he feels like he's not doing the right thing by his people, he also was always a reluctant leader. So I think he was a little bit more willing to bend the knee than maybe others would have been. And just, okay, yeah, you go be the queen. I don't fucking want it. I don't want it. I'll stay here in the north. And then this last season with Jon, they basically used him being a Targaryen as a way to drive a wedge between him and Dany, even though incest has never been something foreign to the Targaryens in the past. It is to him, because he was raised the Stark way, and that's not something they do. And there's always the lore that the Mad King went mad partially due to incest because the Targaryens were inbreeders constantly. So once he finds that out, he's done, like, from a moral standpoint with the sex. But it almost seems like he's supposed to be so in love with her still that he puts up with the shit that she does he disagrees with for as long as he can. Because it's kind of this ultimate, like, he loves her and he wants to see her be successful and he wants to be close to her, but at the same time, the moral part of him, the Ned Stark in him, is telling him this shit is wrong and he's got to do something about it. They don't do a good job of flushing that out and like having him express it. It's just a lot of him standing around and seeming like a bitch boy through most of the final couple episodes. You think he's going to have a final... First, I thought he was going to have a big-ass sword fight with the Night King. That never happened. I thought he was going to have some kind of final battle with Grey Worm. That never happened. And I thought that he was going to have some kind of a fire shit with the dragon where he survives fire, and that never happened. It was just kind of him waiting around so that Dany could go psycho and then he could kill her at the end. But where I've been getting with the Jon and him kind of being... Another indication of his character, his dog is named Ghost. Think about, like, Sansa's dog was named Lady. She wanted to grow up and be like a proper lady, a queen, you know, be married to a prince or a king, like Lady. And Jon's dog's name is Ghost. Like, he wants to intermingle without being acknowledged. He wants to be seen and not heard. Like, so he kills her and just allows himself to be arrested. They don't even explain it, which is one of the most fucked up parts of the finale. All the scenes we get are just people walking around and no talking and no exposition. After Jon kills the Queen of Dragons, we just smash cut to a few months later. We don't see if he turned himself in. We don't see how that situation went. We don't see him pondering whether he wants to be king or not. It's never even questioned. Not to mention the fact, so you got to figure when Grey Worm and the Unsullied found out, they wanted blood. And they probably would have killed Jon right on the spot. The Dothraki, on the other hand, they have a keep what you kill mentality, kind of necromonger style. So once Jon killed Khaleesi, he should have been all of a sudden in charge of all the Dothraki. And it appeared like the Dothraki were multiplying like rabbits. So I think he would have a fairly significant army at his disposal. And the rightful claim to the throne, which he seems so begrudging to accept. He didn't discard it enough to where he kept his lips sealed. He still told people that he was actually a Targaryen, which makes it seem like he wanted it to sneak out. But then he didn't capitalize on it when he had the opportunity. It's all very, very weird how they do that. But a lot of these arcs and what's fucked up about them, I think, is due to the writer, D&D, the showrunners, only being given certain plot points and having no idea how to get there in a natural kind of weaving a web kind of situation. They didn't so much weave... can't talk right now. They didn't so much weave a web as they just built a bridge from point A to point B. It didn't have all these interconnecting, we zig here and we zag there, and then this gets explained there. It was just, this is where we're going. Trains are moving. It was literally like the difference between a helicopter, which can maneuver in any direction four-dimensionally, forward, backward, up, down, all around, turn in circles, and a train. They did this last couple seasons like a train, just here we're going to go, and a bullet train at that. We're just going to hit all these stops as soon as we can in a totally linear way. I think that they could have explained Jon not wanting that leadership role better. Dany was one of my favorite characters. It's her, Jon, and Tyrion are right there for me. And we saw her at the very beginning. She looks like a victim. She carries herself like a victim. She's mousy. She seems somewhat numb to life, the way she's treated. She basically gets sold to the call and fucking hate fucked for the first few nights she's there. She has to adjust to this different way of life, the food. She doesn't speak the language. And through that, she's able to persevere, and she slowly gains confidence and becomes comfortable with the role of leadership, as well as discovers that she's fireproof and thus she's a real dragon. And I think that's where she comes up with the idea to spend time with the eggs in fire and hatch them. I'm not sure about that. Anyway, her motive seems to be not only to get back the throne and what she claims is rightfully hers from her family, but to free people that she identifies with, people that are mistreated and being forced to do things against their will and have no say in how their own life goes. That seems to be her target audience. And along the way, she commits horrible acts of violence. She does heinous things. She executes people. But it always seems to be justified when viewed through the lens of saving the common people and innocent people. And she totally loses that on a dime abruptly. They did like a half season of exposition in like 15 minutes. They kind of show she's getting circles around her eyes. They briefly try to show that she's somewhat isolated. But it really needed more time. It felt like we just were hit in the face with it. I can get how her transition into being the Mad Queen could make sense. I even get how it could take place at that battle specifically. But I don't get how she could get there so quickly when just like a few episodes ago, she was normal Khaleesi. There are elements to the lore that can help explain and contribute sound exposition on why she makes that decision, why she decides to tear down the city, why she's all of a sudden in that moment overcome with rage. So if you really want to get down to it, the Targaryens, okay. Why is there a king? You have all these separate areas, yet they have their leaders and then there's one king. Why is that? It's because they were all conquered and then they were ruled by this one king. That was first done 300 years prior to where we pick up with the TV series by Aegon Targaryen, Aegon the Conqueror. And he was a foreigner. They are from east. They're from across the Narrow Sea. They landed on Dragonstone, and instead of going back east, they came west to Westeros. They landed where King's Landing is. That's why it's called King's Landing, on the eastern coast of Westeros, and they proceeded to conquer every house, or get every house to bend the knee, until they became the leaders over everything. And they constructed King's Landing and the Red Keep on the eastern shore, where they first landed, facing towards their original home. And the only kings were Targaryens for 300 years. Then you have the quote usurper, the rebellion with Robert Baratheon. The Mad King is killed by Jaime. Robert sits on the throne. And you now have the first non-Targaryen ruler since the kingdoms were conquered to begin with. Yet the Targaryens are kind of foreigners. But you also have this weird aspect that the first Baratheon to be in charge of wherever they're, I don't remember where they live. Horus Baratheon was said to be half Targaryen. So Robert Baratheon has a sliver of Targaryen in him anyway. It all gets pretty convoluted. You see a lot of situations where these two houses are together and then later on they're not together anymore. They marry their houses. 200 years later they're fighting. But the point is that if you're looking at from Khaleesi's point of view, her family kind of had to abandon their home, and they came over to this country and conquered it. Not really justifiably, but I don't think she's contemplating that in her mind. But then they constructed the capital and the castle, and it was theirs for hundreds of years. They were the only ones who ruled there. Then all of a sudden, this guy, Robert Baratheon, comes in, does his rebellion, murders everybody, kicks them out, and now Robert Baratheon's the king of everything, when it's only ever been Targaryens before, and they built the fucking castle. If you have that in mind, then when she is there at King's Landing with her dragon and she stares up at the Red Keep, it would make more sense for her to be really fueled with anger at that moment based off those elements of the past. Like, it all would come tumbling down. Like, she would feel like that is her family's shit and someone stole it from them, and she would just be overcome with rage. They could have shown more of her being kind of... They did it in little bits and pieces where they tried to make it look like Jon has the respect of the people more than she does, especially in the north. She can't trust the people around her like Varys and Tyrion, and so she starts to feel less and less like she has anybody else that's on her side. But it all just happens so fucking fast, so fast, so fast, that it's hard to digest in that way. Part of why I want to read the books is I believe that there's a way to get there that makes more sense and isn't so abrupt. The last specific character that I want to talk about is Bran. So Bran ends up becoming king, as you all know, despite the fact that he seems to not be interested in that ever. And he even can be quoted as saying, "I'm not Bran anymore, I'm no one, I just live in the past." But Westeros has this very interesting, complicated past, right? This history of the Targaryens and the Baratheons and how every house came to be and their lineage, and it's all very complex and interweaving. But for some reason, in the middle of all that lore, George R.R. Martin decided to start his story with Bran. I believe the first chapter in the first book is Bran. The first episode of the TV show is a lot based around Bran, and the end, the cliffhanger, is Bran getting shoved out the window, which essentially begins his transformation into the Three-Eyed Raven. So if you look at it from that point of view, your book ends... Because we know that Bran becoming king was given to D&D by George R.R. Martin. So if you look at it from that point of view, your bookends are Bran starting the transition into becoming the Three-Eyed Raven, and it finishes with Bran becoming king. There's an interesting scene in the first episode, or second episode of the TV show, that I'm not sure if it's in the book or not, but... The gal who's sitting up with Bran in his room, he's on bed rest, and she's telling him stories about White Walkers, and she's sitting there knitting. He sees a crow in the window, and it's squawking, and she says, "Don't believe anything a crow says, they're all liars." And I'm wondering if that's a bit of odd foreshadowing. The main thing that makes me think that there's something afoot with the Bran character is at the end when they suggest he becomes king, and his line is, "What do you think I came all this way for?" That suggests that he has had intent to become the king, or he knew this was coming. And I think that's interesting because there's a lot of him sitting around doing nothing throughout the course of the series. Once he becomes paralyzed, he's just an innocent stander by, whatever the fuck the term is, you know what I mean. He's not really interfering in the course of events, and he is very picky and choosy about what parts of the past he chooses to share and what he chooses to say. If you look at the previous Three-Eyed Raven, he was relegated to living inside a tree. Like, permanently. That's what he did. That leads me to believe that he wasn't very well accepted by society, and that he was kind of pushed out there. I may be wrong when I guess that, but I just kind of have that feeling. And I get the feeling, this is total speculation, I have almost nothing to back this up, but I think that maybe Bran is actually evil. I think that maybe the three-eyed raven thing is actually a bad thing. And I think that maybe he used this power to see the best course of events he could take to become king. And then he just kind of left himself out of the mix so that they could take place. I think that there's probably more to when he was warging and we didn't see what he was doing. It was probably up to some sinister shit, or making sure that something in the future was still playing out the way it was supposed to. We never see him warg with a dragon, which seems to be like it. Maybe he can't do it with magical creatures. You even have, which is George R.R. Martin's writing, the Hodor thing. He went back in time and like time splice fucked up Hodor's brain and reprogrammed his wiring to where for the rest of his life he was just focused on holding the door, even though it wasn't going to come up for like 30 years. That's like some long-term 5-dimensional chess he's playing. So that leads me to believe that there's other things along the way that Bran may have been setting up in the past to make all the dominoes fall into place for him to become king in the future. I think that he may have figured out that he could use his power as the three-eyed raven to manipulate the past to get outcomes that he wants out of the future. And also when he decides to tell Jon that he's a Targaryen, he's not so forthcoming with information about what he sees and what he does, but he wants that to be out there. And it seems like that's because he knows that that's going to lead to the downfall of Daenerys and that Jon isn't going to want to rule. That's just my opinion. I think that there's a more sinister aspect to Bran, and that when George R.R. Martin's books end with Bran on the throne, it's going to make a lot more sense. That's just a total speculation, what I'm guessing, but I feel like there's little bits and clues there. And the fact that he chose to take this snippet out of time in Westeros and show it to us, where it's bookended by Bran falling out of the window and getting paralyzed, Bran becoming king. So everything in between basically is the pathway to Bran becoming king. And the Game of Thrones may be the game that Bran is playing, where he's kind of doing this other dimensional, multiverse, time-traveling chess to get the outcomes he wants in the real world. I think it's possible that could be what they were doing, or I could be a fucking idiot. Either way. I think that Bran almost needs to have a more sinister motivation for wanting to become king because of what being king of Westeros means. Like I just laid out, the only reason there's a king is because Aegon came in and conquered all these territories and made it so there was one king. So to the idea that a few guys are just going to choose a new king and that everybody's going to be okay with that when they see themselves more as independent states than they do part of a united democracy or whatever the fuck you want to call it. It just goes against the whole idea of what the throne is and why there's lineage and how it gets passed down. Someone who has no merit can't just be placed on it because nobody's going to respect the authority or the rule. That's why the Targaryens conquered it, and it was handled passed down through heirs until Robert conquered it. It's the keep what you kill mentality. So the way the show passes it off, where everybody just kind of chooses Bran, I don't buy that that's how it would play out in George R.R. Martin's world. I think that there would have to be some type of authority or ability or competence exercised on Bran's part, if not some type of grand master plan where he just straight up takes it. That would make a lot more sense than everybody just kind of decides to give it to him because he's got the best story. He really doesn't. He really hasn't done a fucking thing. He might have the best story in the books, but in the show, my God. And how good of a... it definitely has to be different than the show and the book, because how good could he be at ruling in the present day when he spends so much time inhabiting other beings in other times? Like, that's why Tyrion gets to be Hand of the King, so that he can handle all that mess. So that basically handles all the specific characters I wanted to talk about. I think I probably fucked some of that up. It's so hard to remember everything you want to say once you get off and rolling. A couple more topics I wanted to cover, though. Winter. From the very first season, they hammer us with winter is coming, winter is bad, winter lasts a long time, winter is a struggle. You think that shit's hard now, wait till winter gets here. It's all winter, 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 winter. While simultaneously denying the existence of White Walkers. So I think it's important to note that at the beginning of the timeline, or at least the snippet that we're experiencing through the eyes of the show, the White Walkers and winter are separate things. They're not the same. They're not tied together. They're not linked. When they're afraid of winter coming, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're afraid of White Walkers coming. Ned Stark himself says a shitload of times, winter is coming. But he also tells, I believe, Bran, that White Walkers haven't existed for thousands of years. So there's adults in the show living in the realm who have experienced winter, who have experienced long winters. Yet White Walkers haven't been around for thousands of years. So the elements of winter and the forces of the White Walkers are two different opposing entities. That's two different obstacles that the characters need to overcome in the story. And they tie them into one in these last couple seasons. It makes it so that winter doesn't come until the White Walkers come, and then as soon as the White Walkers are gone, winter is leaving. And they were not that closely linked, at least at the beginning. That doesn't seem to be the intention. There was something fucked up and inherently dangerous about winter on its own. White Walkers were a legend that most people didn't even believe because it had been so long since they had to encounter them. And if you look at the way the White Walker shit played out in the final season of this, a lot of those people are still going to exist. They only made it to Winterfell. The northern troops at Winterfell snuffed it all out. There's a shitload of people down south and back east that have no idea that there was ever a threat. It's just a stupid fucking fish story to them. I really thought that the White Walkers, with that big of an army and being able to resurrect the dead, and then they get a dragon and they've got giants, I thought that it was going to be like a countrywide battle. I thought it was going to be like fucking literal world war, where anybody and everybody was fighting against White Walkers for the survival of humanity. And as we know, it just didn't end up being that. And I also expected winter to present struggles for the people that was just dealing with the elements. Winter is supposed to be severe. Feet and feet of snow very cold, dark for a long period of time. We also never really get it explained why the seasons are so fucked up. Why is it summer for several years and winter for several years? How does that... Why is that part of the story, and how does it make sense? That's never really cleared up. I don't know what I got here. I kind of already talked about this, but the ending with the behavior of Grey Worm. So the fact that he didn't want to just murder Jon right out of the gate when there is no leader, right? Jon murders Khaleesi. Jon clearly doesn't accept the throne or doesn't pursue the throne. Presumably he turns himself in and somehow isn't murdered on the spot, and he's taken down to the dungeons and he's a prisoner. Okay. So the city is now under military rule by the Unsullied and the Dothraki, and there's any type of order whatsoever. Like, the idea that the city continued to function and maintained any order. Those guys were just raping and killing everybody in the streets. Like, who is in charge that's keeping all this together and wrangled in for the seemingly at least a month before we are thrown into this council meeting where half the people don't belong there, half the people aren't identified, and there's more people that should be there that aren't. And there's a water bottle or two in the scene. Oh, man. So, somehow, King's Landing has continued to function. People still live there, and it's still what can be called a city, despite Daenerys's rampage and the fact that it's been run by the Unsullied and the Dothraki for at least a month, because Bran and Sansa and everybody had to come to King's Landing, and we know from season 1 that it takes a month to ride to King's Landing from Winterfell. So it's been at least a month. Okay, so you've got that element that Grey Worm doesn't kill Jon, and that he's somehow now like the leader, the military dictatorship that they've had been going on. It's like a military state of emergency. I don't know what you would call it, but now Grey Worm is the leader. And he comes to this meeting, and he is somehow like... He should want Jon dead. That should be about the only thing that he's willing to accept. He should want Tyrion dead. That's about the only thing he should be willing to accept. He tells Tyrion to shut up, yet lets him speak. He's acting like he has a bunch of authority, but doesn't necessarily exercise any of it. And then when it's all said and done, he just packs up and fucking leaves. And he assumes that Jon shipped off to the Night's Watch, but he doesn't know for sure. And they make it seem like Grey Worm's opinion and his thirst getting quenched is a crucial portion of the story, and it's just not. Then the Dothraki just pack up and leave and go with them, even though technically Jon should be their new call, and they don't like boats, and they have this big city where a bunch of the people just got murdered and they were running shit. They don't really seem to have any incentive to want to leave. It's just, again, they tried to wrap everything up too quickly, and they maybe should have been willing to cut loose of some storylines along the way and kind of thin the herd, and not try to have every single character's storyline end at the exact same time in the exact same episode. It all felt like real forced, like the end of the movie Limitless, where he's just like, nope, I just weaned myself off and now I'm excellent, I'm great every day, and I figured it out, solved it. Like you have this pretty good movie, and then the ending is, no, I figured it out, I'm awesome. And you're just like, what? That was how he came up. That's the answer they came up with for this insurmountable obstacle that he had in his way. It's kind of what you feel like they did with this. It was just like simple connect and dot options. Like, this can go here, that can go there, that can go there. Does it make sense? No, not really. Does it make enough sense? Yeah, it's pretty good. Okay, we'll do that. Okay, and then the wall. So Jon gets sent to the Wall. What the fuck for? So, in the first season, they kind of shed some light on the fact the Wall is huge. There's multiple castles along the Wall. There are so few men in the Night's Watch that they barely can keep this one castle afloat. They barely have enough food and supplies for their men, and there's less than 1,000 of them. You go through all, and supposedly, some believe that they're keeping the realm safe from the White Walkers. Most of them think that they're keeping the realm safe from the wildlings, which really are just people who didn't want to live under the thumb of all this weird rulers and dictators and kings and queens. They just wanted to be free out in the woods. So they're really not even a threat. They're just perceived as one. So you have all these battles go down. The zombie dragon, the White Walker dragon, blows a huge hole in the wall. A significant portion of their forces are lost. The wildlings become allies. They make good with the wildlings. They realize they're just misunderstood, and they don't really want to live south of the Wall. They like their way up north. They defeat the White Walkers. So the two threats that seem to be the sole purpose of the Night's Watch are gone. Like, what are they going to do there? There is still a huge hole in the wall. Are they going to rebuild it? Because supposedly that was done with giants and magic. And what's the imminent threat now? Is it just a bunch of fucking off at the wall? What exactly? Why is there still a wall? And then when Jon gets there, he sees Tormund, and they all get on their horses and he leads them north of the Wall, and it's not exactly clear. I think that he's becoming the new king beyond the Wall. I think that he is now fully transitioned into the ghost that he always wanted to be, and he's just going to disappear out there beyond the Wall, and probably never to be seen or heard of again by anybody but the tribe that he travels with. And you have basically just some kind of bullshit filler scenes. I don't mean to sound like I'm complaining so much. I really do love this show. That's why it's sticking in my craw so much. I feel like I just talked for almost an hour and a half, and I still didn't do a good job of expressing myself or really wrapping my arms around this. And part of that is because of the failures of the later seasons to really connect the dots in a meaningful way and have it all connect and make sense for the entire part. But by going back at the beginning and seeing the stuff that is, proper lore and canon, and then seeing where they ended up, I'm trying to see if I can kind of figure out what paths they were going on and how they ended up there, or how they could have ended up there better. I just want to figure out if it's even possible for it to make sense, I guess. And it has led to me deciding to read the books. So hopefully George R.R. Martin actually releases them, and I'm not ultra disappointed by never receiving an ending, because that would be the ultimate slap in the face, right? I probably shouldn't even start reading them until he finishes the series, but I'm a sucker for pain, what can I say? The effects, for the most part, are very good. The cinematography, the way it's shot and edited, that's all, for television, top-notch. You could poke some holes in it when it comes to being best of the best, top of the line, especially when, like, the scene with Ghost in the last episode is just a digitally reworked scene from season 4 where he's saying goodbye to Ghost. But there's a lot of people who did a lot of great work on this, and I'm not even trying to so much cast blame on D&D for what they did. I don't think it was ever their intention to produce original Game of Thrones content. They were married to the idea of adapting Martin's work. And I don't know if it's laziness, if it's thoroughness, if it's a marketing ploy, but he stopped coming out with books at a prolific pace. Like, he had a year, 2, 3 gap between most of the books. And then once this series started, he started having 6, 7 year gaps between books. And there's probably no way that the D&D anticipated that that would be the case. They probably thought, we'll start with the books you have done, and by the time we catch up, you'll already have released more books. Boom, slam, pancake time. An unfortunate part of it is that they wanted to shoehorn it into a certain amount of episodes, though. And you really see how a story this thorough and this intricate it requires X amount of seasons and episodes just to effectively tell the story. You're either going to have to cut major portions out and it's not going to make as much sense, or you're going to have to cut the story off in the middle. And I guess they thought that according to their agreement of 70 episodes or 76 episodes, whatever it was, that they would be able to get to the end point at a proper pace. But they never got the source material. So then they had to try to figure out how to do this for themselves. And I don't think that they are as good at identifying directions that the story can go just for the sake of it, or just to contribute to details later on. I think that they view the storyline too linearly, and they see we're here and we need to go to there, and they don't see enough stops and bumps along the way. They just go from one to the other. They're not seeing as many veers and turns that they can take. Because it's fluff in a way, if you want to be like robotic about it, because how would a computer or an alien analyze the story? They would kind of just give you the finer points, right? And it would be very linear. You wouldn't get all the nuance and subtlety. But because I can definitely see their line of thinking. I can definitely see how it's hard to know you're here and be told that you have to go there and have no idea what the creator was thinking in order to get to that point. I'm sure it makes a ton of sense to George R.R. Martin, but if you're just getting point A, point B is what they hand to you, fuck. Like, there might be a very significant scene that Martin has in mind, or an idea that is the linchpin of the turn that makes Khaleesi go mad, or makes Bran being king make sense. He might have like this great idea for how he's going to get that accomplished, but when he just tells somebody what the beginning and end are, and they have to fill in the blanks in between, if you don't, there's going to be a lot of ways to go about it that don't ring true. And unfortunately for them, a lot of the ways they came up with to bring these character arcs to a close didn't ring true, just because they hadn't spent enough time fleshing them out and building the proper suspense and tension between the characters and really making us care. They started giving us so much so quick that it was even hard to really care about it. And I say they because at the end of the day, they're the ones who made the show still. Like, nobody else made it. They made it. But there's a confluence of issues that contributed to it falling short of the mark, I think. And part of that is George R.R. Martin's fault for not getting the books out, and for being stubborn and only allowing D&D to work on the series, because they want it out. They're going to go make Star Wars, It would have been great if they could have passed the torch to some other people who were competent, who were willing to give it a go, with making it their own and really taking it in some original directions. It might have been strategy on Martin's part because he thought that nobody was going to read his books if the show and the books are released simultaneously covering the same material. And now that he has left it in their hands and they fucked it up so bad, there's even more of a demand for the next book to come out. People want to know how this was really supposed to go. They want the proper build up to Daenerys dying, to Bran becoming king, to all of it, and see what the fuck were the children of the forest for? Who's the prince who was promised? All these, what were the symbols that the White Walkers left all about? What was Castor about, the sacrificing all the male children? There's a lot of things that seemed like they were going to be important later on and pay off, and they just kind of got ignored and forgotten. And so I'm very interested to see what the intention was with those, because he didn't put them in there for no reason. And he tells these very complex stories. Overall, I'm appreciative of it. I wish that I wasn't driving myself nuts trying to make sense of something that I probably can't make sense of. You know what I mean? Like, at my core, I still believe it's good because there was so much of it that was good. But I might be naive in thinking that I can actually sort through this and come out with a cohesive storyline and shit that makes, like, it might be foolhardy and I might be just totally overthinking it. It might just be so bad that it's not possible to figure out. All respect to the actors. I know they gave their heart and soul. A lot of them were disappointed with the way it turned out. I don't want this to end sounding like I'm sour on the entire Game of Thrones franchise. I appreciate that they even brought it to life at all. I'm just curious. I just want to try to make sense of it. That's all. If you think you've made sense of it, you want to correct some shit I said, feel free. And again, let me know if you guys are interested in me going back and doing commentary tracks, starting from the beginning, working my way through the entire series, and trying to just pick up these pieces and see where they go. I know that going back and watching the first episode, knowing that Ned is not Jon's father, and that he's a Targaryen, and seeing how they navigate that issue clear back then, seeing how much Robert hates the Targaryens, how much he loved Ned's sister, seeing the shit that Ned puts up with for having a bastard when it wasn't even legitimately his son. And these seeds that are planted, Arya, Rob and Jon are trying to teach Bran how to shoot a bow and arrow. And Arya shoots from like 50 yards behind him and gets a bullseye. You can see that she's already kind of leaning towards being the master of weapons and pursuing those type of goals. You see a lot of it being laid out for you from the very beginning. You just didn't know what you were watching yet. You can make much better sense of the Jon Arryn murder and the rumors that are circulating back and forth. I gotta say, the Catelyn Stark character was kind of driving me fucking nuts, though. I don't know what it is. I can't put my finger on it. But when I was watching those first couple episodes, she just stuck out to me like a sore thumb. You see, from the very first episode, the White Walkers are the first thing you see. It seems imminent and somehow takes 8 seasons for them to actually culminate in any type of a major battle. Bran being curious and having an explorative mind and body then, because he's climbing all over hell. He wants to know what's going on. He really is into thrill seeking and exploring. Then he gets shoved out the window, and he starts the transition to the three-eyed raven. We're picking up with that right off the bat. Whereas then we just thought it was a tragedy and it was a major shock to have this act committed against this kid. His dad seems like he's the main character of the show. It all seems like it just kind of fits in, but you don't really know where they're going with it. And then when you see how it ended up, it makes sense along the way. So, again, I'm interested in taking that journey with you guys and talking it out while I watch each episode. It would be a hell of an undertaking, but if people want it, I'm willing to do it. I know that this has been a hell of an undertaking in itself if you've listened to this entire podcast. I can't believe I've been talking for this long. I intended to record multiple podcasts tonight, and it doesn't look like I'm going to check that box because it's already 1:30 in the morning. Anyway, I appreciate you listening. You can check out Avarice Podcast on YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, Facebook, Instagram, or just type it into Google and who knows what you might find. Until the next time, this is Devin signing off, saying click that like button, subscribe, and be easy.